I'm going to talk about how you can introduce an alternative currency and how that can be used to benefit a designated group of people or a designated area. And why is that important? Well, two fronts. The first one is with an alternative currency, you can contain the wealth within that designated group of people or within that designated area. And that can become important if there's a collapse around you. So, this one is really going to touch on a ring-fenced economy. I'm going to have a discussion about parallel systems and how we could set up something different from the system we're constrained under at the moment. Now, I realise it's teaching Granny to suck eggs to tell you how bad the financial system is. Money kind of lost its meaning many years ago. Many years ago. From its first introduction as a tool to ease trade instead of bartering, to now being a system and an implement of control, and the means by which a very small percentage of people can put pressure on governments and organisations in order to create more power for themselves. It's a system that doesn't benefit us, and yet it's something that consumes so much of our time and energy chasing money. And in reality, none of us really want money. What we want are the goods and services that can be exchanged for it. And I would love to work down to, or back to, or up to a system where we could actually get rid of money. I see no reason at this point in our civilization that it needs to exist. Before we could jump to that point, I think we need to look at systems we can put in place that do benefit us, that can keep the money we make and create within our group, within our sphere, and not be put out to corporations, companies that dislike us, and are wholly unethical in their practices. And it's not as complicated as it might sound. I'm sure many of you have been to pleasure parks and fairgrounds around the UK. And nowadays it's not money that you exchange with the vendor, it will be tokens or tickets which you purchase upon entry. So you give the man your £50 at the gate and he'll give you 50 tokens. And those tokens are exchanged throughout that pleasure park, throughout that fun fair, for a ride on the bumper cars or a hot dog, for a trip on the Ferris wheel or the roller coaster. or whatever else it is these days. And it's a clever idea, because what they've created there is a financial system that benefits only them. You can't take those tokens, leave the park and spend them anywhere else. So your money is going just to them. And that's kind of what we need to look at setting up for ourselves. A ring-fenced system where the money within it goes back into our businesses and to our people, and not to these globalist organisations. So you need to imagine for a while a circle, and within that circle different individuals and businesses. A young lady selling tea and coffee, another company selling candles, someone selling soaps and shower gels, someone offering web design, someone offering graphic design, a plumber, a mechanic, and hopefully many of these. So all the things you would usually be spending your money on outside should be available within that ring-fenced system. Now, it's quite blatantly obvious that in the early stages not everything will be available within it. But hopefully, as time progresses, nearly all of your requirements should be met within that system. And you could set it up much the same as these pleasure parks, and you could do it pound for token. So £1 buys 1 token, £100 buys 100 tokens. Now the tokens can only be spent within that ring-fenced community. But there will be times you want to take your money out, and that's not what we want. We don't want people to take their money out and spend it somewhere else. So you need to incentivize people to stay within that group. And a good way of doing that is with the hammer, or not the carrot. So you could say that if you put £100 in, you'd get 100 tokens. But you can only ever take out 95. 5% has to stay within. And you could do this for sellers. So if you're selling something and you sell it for £100, £95 you can take out if you wish, but 5% has to stay in. And if you do it this way, what you'll end up with is an accumulation of wealth within that system that can only be used within that system. And that's powerful, and that influences markets, because people will have a glut of money to spend, and when they've got that, businesses emerge to meet that demand. So there's a demand for mechanics and people have money to spend, mechanics will appear. And it's something we could look at nationally and locally. So one system, and you could break it down to local areas, to regions. No point me looking at a plumber down in the southwest of England if I'm living in the northeast. So some things will be local, some things will be national. There's no reason today that all products can't be shipped nationally or internationally. But for this discussion, let's talk national. How many people do we know who have their own business, could offer a service, could offer a product locally, nationally? They could be within that ring-fence community, If stuff was available there, I would put my money in, buy the tokens, spend them within that ring fence. The sellers would get their money. Some they can take out, 95%. 5% would stay in, but they could spend that money on products and services that they require, from businesses they know, from people they trust, thus keeping the money out of the globalist organisations, going back to our own people, and with a system where a proportion is accumulated, thus generating more businesses. So before money was introduced, most people will know this anyway, but it's worth touching on. Goods and services were exchanged through a system of barter, which is fine, but difficult, because you have to have the goods or services that someone else wants, and they have to have exactly the same thing that you need in order for that barter, for that swap to take place. If you don't, then the marketplace becomes very difficult. So if you've got a chicken and you want a lamp, but the person who's got a lamp doesn't want a chicken, he wants a bag of salt, you could then look for someone else with a lamp, or you will probably look for someone with salt, and hopefully they'll want a chicken. Then you can do that barter, then you can take the salt and go and get your lamp. As you can see, that can go on for quite a long time. So money was introduced as a tool to ease the exchange of goods and services between two parties, be them groups or individuals. So a tool to ease trade. It was also used rapidly, once introduced, as a means of amassing your personal wealth. So you could save money and have a lot of it. You could be more productive and sell more, and therefore have more money. And we can see how that has pushed into the modern day. I understand that there's a lot of people interested in silver or precious metals as an alternative currency. There is an issue with this. Let's take silver, of which I've got a fair bit. Some I've got stacked, some I'm wearing. I don't envisage silver being an alternative currency, because it is based on monetary value. So silver for me is a financially sound way to ensure my money retains its worth. So if I buy a kilo of silver, it's likely that that kilo of silver isn't going to dramatically lose its worth, so I can trade it in at a later date for money. So silver is still linked to money. The problem with using that as an alternative currency is silver is still quite expensive to purchase. So if you're going to spend £100 buying £100 worth of silver, it's worth £100. It's still linked to monetary worth. And there will be people out there shouting now that actually silver is at least a hard currency, it's worth something. Well, the argument against that is that actually silver is only worth anything if you need silver. By making a silver goblet or a necklace, then yes, I would need silver, and therefore it has intrinsic value to me. But as and of itself, silver has no real intrinsic value. There's very little that does. When money first became introduced, seashells were used, and you could pick them up on the beach, but they were used as coinage. When the first coins were introduced, the coin itself is worth very little and has to be linked to a value, be that a bag of salt or a bushel of corn. So one coin is worth one bushel of corn, and therefore prices can be fixed accordingly within the marketplace. So I don't envisage silver being used as a currency, although it is good to ensure your money retains its worth. So it's worth buying silver, because if there's a collapse, then you can trade that in and get your money. Introducing a currency isn't difficult. It's been done locally in this country, it's been done locally throughout Europe, and probably globally. In Bristol, they have the Bristol pound, or they did up until recently. And there's other localised areas that have their own little currency, and that's to encourage business and people to spend their money locally. They're only accepted locally. Great idea. And it works. So these things aren't new. And these things could be national. There's no reason why not. They usually fall down because people don't use them enough. But I want you to imagine how many people would like to retain cash. Quite a few. How many businesses would still like to deal in cash? There's going to be many. The ability to spend your money without it being tracked and traced is very important for your freedom. To have a financial currency that cannot be stopped, altered, hindered, restricted by the state is of utmost importance. So it's a discussion we need to have. And it's one thing they don't want us to have. If we retain that ability to make and spend our own money without them controlling it, a lot of what they have planned won't be possible. Now, most of these currencies are local, as I've said, but not all of them. If you look further afield, in South Africa, there's a town called Orania. Most of the people from Dutch extraction. And they have their own currency, and everybody uses it. Now, the thing that binds all of these currencies together is that usually they're pegged to the local legal tender, or the legal tender in that country. So the Bristol pounds are pegged to the UK pound. One UK pound will buy you one Bristol pound. The same in South Africa. One aura is worth £1 I think it is, the legal tender in South Africa. I would propose that we don't do that, for a few good reasons. The first being that the pound is soon to disappear. So we need to back it with something real. Now, historically, money has been backed by gold, but that's very expensive. But there's no reason we couldn't back a currency with silver. Quite simple. So that every pound produced is backed by a pound of silver. Not a pound in weight, but a value. There's lots of advantages to using silver. Now, you wouldn't need to carry around a purse stuffed with silver coins and ingots. We could produce notes. Security printing's relatively simple these days, and each note backed by silver held in vaults. I understand that there are pirates out there who would love to carry around a purse stuffed with silver ingots and coins, but the majority of people understand banknotes, and that's something we should continue with. There's no point in reinventing the wheel. So we could introduce a currency, we could have it backed by something real. It doesn't have to be digital. These things are precarious. A real currency backed by a real commodity that we could use as cash. I'll use the same example and hopefully extrapolate out a little longer to explain it. I want you to imagine an amusement park, something like Disney World. So quite big to start with. And the only currency you can use within this amusement park are tokens. So when you turn up with yourself and maybe your family, and you're going to be there for the day, you give the man £100 and he gives you 100 tokens. And one token is worth £1. The beauty of that for the amusement park is you can only use that token within that amusement park. And you have your day there. And you buy your hot dogs and you spend tokens, and you go on rides and you spend tokens, and you buy a cuddly toy and you buy it with tokens. And halfway through the day, if your kids are with you, you would have run out of tokens and you'll go and buy some more. And you finish your day there and you've got 10 tokens left. And you walk up to the man you bought them from and he says, no, we don't buy tokens back. So you wander off and spend another £10 worth of tokens in that amusement park. And it's the only place you can spend them, so there's no point in taking them home. That's a ring-fenced economy. And just like we mentioned with silver, that token, which is worth nothing, is linked to monetary worth. So it's linked to your pounds that you paid for it. Now the vendors in this amusement park have got a big box full of tokens at the end of the day. And I want you to imagine that this amusement park that started off big got bigger and bigger. And that these vendors, most of them, live in that amusement park, that there's housing estates and there's houses and flats, and to save travelling to work they live in the amusement park. And at the end of the day, let's say 6 o'clock, it's very dark, isn't it, where that sun's so bright, sorry about that, but you can hear my voice and that's cool. At the end of the day at 6 o'clock Bob gets his big box of tokens and leaves for home. And on his way, he stops at his mate's restaurant in the amusement park because he's hungry and he's had a hard day. And he has a nice meal and he pays for that in tokens because he hasn't changed them back into pounds. And because it's within that amusement park, tokens are accepted. And before he gets home, he stops at a shop. And a shop caters for all the vendors, not the public, but it will also accept tokens. And why not? They have a monetary value. One token is £1. So it'll accept pounds and it'll also accept tokens. And Bob buys some groceries and he pays with tokens and he goes off home. Now, as you can see, that within a relatively short period of time, the vendors within that amusement park that live there and work there start to use more and more tokens and cash them out for pounds less and less. The more things that become available to them within the amusement park. Now, if you go one stage further, you can see that the vendors within that park that already live there would be looking to increase their income. So when people do have to cash their tokens out to buy goods and services that aren't available within the park, any entrepreneurial vendor there is going to spot that actually, if I've got 500 vendors that regularly need a product that they have to purchase from outside, there's an opportunity here for me to do one of two things. The first one is to produce that product myself and sell that to the vendors that need it. Now, there's obviously a profit in that product, otherwise it would not be available. Or I could contact a supplier and for a huge bulk order of 500 as opposed to one, receive a discount. And if I was to get, say, a 20% discount, I could pass 10% on to the vendors that regularly buy that product, therefore they're happy, paying 10% less, and I'm happy for making 10% by being the middleman. And the company that supplies the product is happy because it's getting a regular large order. So now you have an alternative currency that is linked to a monetary value that people understand. That is retaining wealth within an area and within a group of people. So that wealth is not going out to the outside, it's staying within that park. It's also encouraging new businesses to flourish, to provide the goods and services that those vendors require. So it's a good system. Now, why would we need a system like that to begin with? Well, if we were to link it to a currency that we all understand, it's easy to communicate. It's easy to price. As prices rise in the real world, they would necessarily rise within the alternative currency. And in the early stages, that's not really an issue. But it is a means whereby a large group of people can start businesses, trade between each other and to customers that wish to trade with them for their goods and services. Where someone with pound notes can, I'm really showing my age. If I wish to buy a product from within this ring fence community, I would need to pay in tokens. So I cash in my £20 and get £20 worth of tokens. I can then buy the product from the vendor within the ring fenced currency with my tokens. And at the end of the day, they can take those 20 tokens, they can spend them within that ring fenced currency area, or they can cash them out for money. The more businesses, the more people trading, the more people giving goods and services within that ring fenced area, the less money leaks out. The only time it goes out is when you cannot get those goods or those services within that ring fenced area. And that's again when the more entrepreneurial amongst us would say, okay, there's a massive need for clothing, there's a need for music, there's a need for graphic design, there's a need for services like an electrician or a plumber or a mechanic, and these things are needed throughout the country. So there's different areas. Not a lot of good if someone's offering a mechanic service in the borderlands between Scotland and England and I'm way down here in the woods, but if there's someone local, I'm quite up for using them. So it's encouraging more people to provide goods and services within that ring-fenced community where that currency can remain. Now there's further things you can do in the early stages when putting together an alternative currency that could just be a stamped token, a stamped coin. It doesn't have to be silver, it could be any alloy. It could be paper money like we use today. It could be digital, right? But it would be controlled by us. That's the difference. So it's encouraging more people to put in goods and services into that ring-fenced area. The ring-fenced area would grow and grow and grow as the more businesses come on board and more people providing goods and services, the more money stays within the community. Thus denying the outside community, the people we don't want to be dealing with, the very reason they're in business, which is money. And in the early stages, it doesn't matter that it's linked to a current currency. If the pound was to completely drop, it would depend on how self-sufficient that ring-fenced area was. But you could continue to trade on the same level if you could buy your goods and services from within. So it might mean that raw materials would start to be traded within there. So you might have a baker that sells bread, right? But he needs wheat to do that. So you might have a farmer that produces wheat who would trade within that ring-fenced community. So now you can buy raw materials to make your product to sell to the community. What you end up with is a currency that you're controlling, based on the idea of self-sufficiency, because the idea at the end of the day is to have all required goods and services available within the ring-fenced area.